is KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank.
Hello and welcome to another 3-Ma. I am John Kurtz, joined by Cole Manbeck and Derek Young. It feels like it's been a very long time since I have said that. We are all three back together and ready to do some shows. And I was about to say, talk about football that's coming up on the field, but that's not what this will be. This is your conference realignment episode because it has gone crazy. The Big 12 has expanded by 4 more teams. 8 teams have been added since Texas and Oklahoma left. So we will get you recapped on welcoming the Four Corner Schools, the saga, what it means for K-State, and all things conference realignment here on this pod. But as you know, our friends at Holiday Distillery make this happen each and every week. We appreciate them, whether it is the 360 vodka or the Ben Holiday bottled and bond bourbon that you prefer. Make sure you go out and get stocked up. There's still plenty of lake time, although apparently not for us because Cole has still not extended an invite for us to come to the lake. But if you are fortunate enough to have a friend with a boat, make sure that you bring the Ben Holiday bottled and bond bourbon or the 360 vodka on your way out there. You can also just stockpile some of that for tailgate season. We are a month away, people. A month away from you needing that. It is never too early to go out and get it. So support Holiday Distillery, great K-State folks who support us here on the pod. Okay, DY and Cole, we are back. Cole, why haven't we gotten that invite to the lake house yet?
Well, I've been to the lake twice this summer. Twice, Memorial Day weekend and 4th of July weekend. I have not been back since. We will see if we can get some time scheduled, but I do want to make it clear it's not like I'm out there partaking and enjoying the lake all that much either. So it's been kind of a rough summer trying to get the schedules lined up to get out there. We'll see if we can make it work. So
how do you feel about that explanation, DY? Does that suffice?
No, but it's a foregone conclusion that we're probably too far.
No, we're not. No, I am
a season for me from a work standpoint to be able to get out there. So
no,
thanks.
I am committed to continued good faith negotiation with you guys in an effort to find a resolution that's mutually agreeable on a date that we can reach.
That sounds like some corporate community right there. I swear, that is corporate comm stock if I've ever heard it. And
I don't. Hey, I'm just glad we're all together again. I think we probably had like 12 or 13 straight shows, which we had a guest on. And I'm excited that we get to have some fun bantering back and forth. I love having guests on. I know you guys do too. But now we're here in August. We are less than a month from football season, and the preview stuff starts coming, and stupid things that I say and that we say, like college football runs through Manhattan, stuff like that's going to start popping out of our mouths here in the near future. So speaking of which, if you're interested in a college football runs through Manhattan 3-Ma t-shirt, please tweet or reply on Twitter to John Kurtz, Derek, or myself. My Twitter handle is Cole_Manbeck. We tweeted a new 3-Ma clothing line that may potentially launch a couple t-shirt options. So
I don't know if I call it a clothing line. This is not like Balenciaga or something. It's a shirt. We've got yeah. So we've got some exciting stuff coming. Stay tuned for that. If you've been following Cole on Twitter, I think it's pretty easy to figure out some of those things. So we're going to try and make the experience even bigger and better for you this year here on the pod. The Big 12 is also getting bigger and better in 2024. Man, I tell you what, it is crazy to be here actually talking about it happening because, for me, I was so down in the weeds with it. Obviously, those of you who follow me on YouTube are aware of that. I was so in the weeds on realignment for so long, and it felt like this opening was going to be there for the Four Corner Schools to come to the Big 12. In Colorado, Arizona State, and Utah, but it was a long process. It was such an interesting case study in how we consume media and how there are two distinctly different sides to this and sources, quote unquote, on both sides that are clearly working angles through the media. It was a battle. It turned into a battle between the Big 12 and the Pac-12, and when the dust settled, the Pac-12 exploded also in large part because of the Big Ten swooping in at the last minute and deciding to pick up Oregon and Washington. So there's been some debate over how much of a linchpin that actually was at the end. I personally think, based on the reporting of Jason Scheer, who's been great throughout all of this and covered Arizona, that Arizona was probably going to leave no matter what. And the other scenario for the Big 12 was to just have Colorado and Arizona, and then the Pac-8 or whatever maybe sticks together and add some teams. But either way, it worked out with the Pac-12 blowing up and the Big 12 pulling in 4 schools. So before we get to some of the other reaction, because I've been a little annoyed by the national reaction to all of this, well, the Big 12 celebrates a win. let's celebrate that win. I mean, this is huge for a conference that has lost 6 teams throughout its history, always been the one to be picked over, always been the one to be reactive instead of proactive. And Brett Yormark turned that ship around, man, and absolutely killed it here.
I would agree. And there was probably different times. I wonder how realistic or likely that it was, just because some of those, Western schools were so adamant about, not necessarily jumping ship. Even a few that did jump ship. Like we heard, on the tweet from the Utah athletic director was pretty,
which one?
Definitive. Yeah. So pretty definitive in terms of not joining the Big 12. And then obviously they did too, even if they had to kind of come in kicking and screaming a little bit, not as much as Arizona State. So for me, it was kind of what you alluded to, kind of the journey that we had to kind of go through and sift through and kind of stomach before what I think was probably going to be the conclusion all along got here. So, I guess the Big 12 had to exercise a lot of patience, and the Pac-12, to an extent, sans Arizona, kind of had to come in kicking and screaming, but everything happened what we expected to happen if you don't work for the Athletic.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just ecstatic with the additions that are made, and it feels great. I was on the beat back when realignment really started, covering Kansas State and the Big 12 back in 2010 when the Oklahoma, Texas rumors to the Pac-12 had started, Missouri, Nebraska leaving, etc. And it was a terrible feeling, to be honest, even covering the team. But as a K-State fan and talking to folks, it was dejecting to think about where Kansas State could end up in the landscape of college athletics. And then you get through that, you survive, and then you had it come up again when Oklahoma and Texas left. It sucked. And, now you're the aggressor and you're out there able to land these schools, and you're in a position of power to where, the Big 12, they're not going to be at the Big 10 or SEC's level, but the whole goal at this point is to become that third conference, or at the very least survive. Well, look, it sucks for the Pac-12. I get it that they're essentially now gone, but you had to eliminate one of those power conferences if you're going to be able to survive as well. And now the Pac-12 is essentially dead, and the Big 12 is on stable footing and adds some really good brands, actually. The BYU ad last year, that's a national brand. That's a big-time ad. And then, also Colorado, Arizona State, Utah. I mean, people got to remember Utah, since 2014 in the Pac-12, has the second highest winning percentage overall. And it's just a 1% behind Oregon. Utah is 75-35 for a 68% winning percentage since 2014. Oregon is 74-34 at 69% winning percentage. They're better. They've been better than USC, UCLA, Washington, all those other power Pac-12 type programs with tradition. Utah has been at the forefront of that. So that's a big time add to the conference from a football competitive standpoint, big time brand in college football right now with the success they've had under Kyle Whittingham. And then Arizona State, you capture some markets. The Big 12 now has 8 of the top 40 TV markets. They have geographic footprints in those markets from a TV standpoint, and 3 in the top 11. And you add the Denver market. You've got Orlando now. You've got Houston. BYU, as I mentioned, is a national brand. Salt Lake City is 29th in the country, I believe. Or I'm sorry, they're actually, I have it in my notes here, they're 29th in the country, and branding. Denver is 16th. So, yeah, some of those schools may not be the focus point of a lot of those cities, but you are getting TV sets by capturing some of those footprints. So I just love the additions and love what Brett Yormark has done.
You also capture some new rivalries that you can put in place of a few that you do lose. Like, you're going to lose Bedlam, but BYU, Utah probably draws in more TV sets anyway than what Bedlam would.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably debatable, but it's a great rivalry. I mean, point taken. It's a great rivalry. Arizona State is also a fun one. I know, like, Arizona Texas Tech kind of had one back in the day. So there will be some that I think get rekindled there. And Cole, I think you hit on something that is important there, because so much of the national discourse here has been about, consolidation. That's the word that's being used by a lot of people now, as opposed to realignment. Consolidation, what's going on? You're just consolidating the biggest brands in college football, and how much that hurts the sport. And I totally agree. I mean, I 100% agree. I think the annoying part has been like, hey, this has been going on for a long time. Like we basically had this moment 2 years ago, and it was the Big 12, and we didn't see a bunch of sad, somber soliloquies out there from every national media member about how gross and disgusting this is and how sad they are for the Big 12. So I agree that it's a bad thing, but the Big 12 for once is getting a W, and now it's just shrouded in everybody crying about what's happening to the game, which is a little bit annoying. But when we talk about the fact that, Cole, you mentioned, hey, one of these conferences was probably going to have to go away. I mean, we are headed toward obviously a Big 2 world and then probably like one other conference to be the one to take in everybody else. And you look at the landscape of the ACC right now, Florida State seems hell-bent on doing whatever it is that they can to just leave and figure it out, even though they're locked in supposedly to a grant of rights until 2036 right now. But you could be picking up sort of the best of the rest from the ACC when that thing explodes. And I think the big key here, if we want to talk about why the Big 12 outlasted the Pac-12 and why it's the Big 12 that seems best positioned right now to be that third league, it is in large part because Brett Yormark realized that this was about survival as opposed to legitimately closing the gap right away on the Big 10 and the SEC. And I think that was the problem. George Kliavkoff, from reporting that we've seen now, clearly commissioner of the Pac-12, he thought that they would be able to legitimately close the gap on the Big 10 of the SEC, which was dumb. I mean, there's no other way to say it. But the reports are now that he and John Wilner even had confirmed this, who's a Pac-12 reporter, that George Kliavkoff was asking for $500 million at first, which is $50 million per team. Big 12 wound up with 31.7, and you had pretty similar leagues there. That was a ridiculous number and set the expectation bar way too high. And in the end, the deal that they got was going to be a base of $23 to $25 million, depending on who it is that you believe, from Apple. So you can just see it. That was the wrong tone to set. He went out publicly and said multiple times, we will catch the Big 10 of the SEC financially eventually, which was a horrendously dumb thing to say. Meanwhile, Brett Yormark realized, like, hey, we've got to survive, so I'm going to go in and take this TV deal from Fox and ESPN that was, by the way, offered to the Pac-12, and they turned down. And when Yormark jumped in front of them by taking that, he locked in the stability, locked in the exposure with still the linear partners that matter right now, ESPN and Fox, and left the Pac-12 to flounder around and try and get some streaming deal and kick around and wait for it. Another big factor, the economics of what's going on with live sports really hurt the Pac-12 too, because people are being much more discerning with their spending. So that's a long way to say. I think one of the most insightful things Brett Yormark did throughout this whole process was just bring the right approach, which is you got to make sure that you position yourself as the third best conference, and then maybe you can start to try and figure out some ways you can close the gap, which I think for Yormark is going to be decoupling the basketball rights from football and trying to add more basketball powerhouses if he can as basketball-only members to make some extra money there. But first, you had to ensure that you would be the conference best position to be number 3 behind the Big 10 and the SEC.
An argument that I would make would be that the first step was probably to add those other 4 schools, UCF, Houston, Cincinnati, and BYU, and that was Bob Bowlsby. So he probably did the most immediate step first that had to be done in terms of instant survival, and then Brett Yormark took care of the rest. That's probably how I would characterize it, because I don't think that you are appealing enough to television partners without immediately grabbing those 4 schools. When he did so at the time, Bowlsby, you had, again, like an outlet like The Athletic saying that the AAC was more likely to pluck from the Big 12 than vice versa, if you remember that.
Yeah, and DY, I'm curious your opinion on this, because I want to interject on that, because I have seen a little bit. It's not much. I think most people by now have come around to the fact that, like, Brett Yormark's a freaking stud and is doing a lot of really good things for the conference. It wasn't Yormark that added those 4. You're right. It was Bob Bowlsby. But I have seen this thought that, like, man, well, if only you didn't have the dead weight of Houston and UCF or Cincinnati and UCF. It seems like basically those outside of BYU, the other 3, you'll get totally different opinions from people on which 2 are the dead weight. And to me, there's just not really a discernible difference between all 3 in terms of what I think there's a sound argument for any of them. And the point is, you needed strength in numbers at that point when you were down to 8, and they were so similar and all brought big markets. You needed a strength in numbers sort of play right there to just get yourself in position to be able to do this. So I hate that talking point. It annoys the living shit out of me when I hear people say that. Like, oh, if we only didn't have, UCF or Houston or whoever to add to the conference now. No, you needed them. They were a necessity to get here. So you may not think that they're the best long-term thing in the world, but you needed them to get here with this conference. So I hate that complaint about it that I hear sometimes.
I would agree. And if you didn't, you might be looking at the Pac-12, Big 12 as fates right now would maybe be flipped. Because one, if you don't, you're probably not as an attractive television partner. And two, you still leave yourself exposed to the rest of the college football world who is kind of preying on teams right now and trying to expand. And three, even if you hadn't, let's say you only went to 10 and then you got those 4 schools, Arizona State, Colorado, Utah, your mark probably would have taken the 2 that they hadn't taken before anyway, and we'd still be at 16 with the same group of teams, in my opinion. So that's the way that I would see it. But, and again, it's, I don't want to say it's like the underdog story, but I mean, just 2 years ago, and it comes to the inconsistency in reporting from, a lot of the media that covered this, everyone was writing the Big 12's funeral, right? They weren't saying, oh, this is bad for college football, or this is gross, this is despicable. They were saying, oh, this is awesome. We're going to see Texas and Oklahoma play some great teams now instead of, what the leftovers in the Big 12 had. And now the Big 12 might get picked apart by the AAC. I remember how, crazy the reporting was at the time. And even now, they're saying, oh, this is bad for college football. Thanks, Big 12, for being so predatory or whatever. When, depending on who you believe, maybe those other schools don't come if Big 10 doesn't add Oregon or Washington. Or looked at another way, was the Big 12 ever being predatory? Like you said, this was all about survival when it comes to the Big 12. It wasn't necessarily about greed. If there was anybody being predatory at the time, it was the SEC when they took Texas and Oklahoma. Their television deal was going to explode no matter what. It's not like they needed Texas or Oklahoma to survive. The Big 10 didn't need USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington to survive.
And speaking of annoying as shit, Greg Sankey has spoken up a couple times now, being like, trying to be like, oh, we've got it. There's greed and craziness going on. Eli Drinkwitz has been the voice of reason on that, which I get it. We kind of need people like him to say those things, but it's just, Mizzou left and, kind of helped start this thing and went to the SEC. So it's just I don't want to hear any of that from the SEC. They're taking this high and mighty position right now. Oh, we don't need to expand. Sankey said that on Feinbaum yesterday. Oh, we don't need to expand. We're not going to be greedy and go do these things. Spare me. You guys, we know your role in all of this, and you kicked off 2 years ago this next huge round of realignment and left the conference on its deathbed and didn't care at all. So yeah, so much of the national narrative is very annoying. We'll let Cole give his thoughts on that in just a moment, but we do need to take a second to thank Home Field Apparel. They are the best at producing collegiate apparel these days. I love it. I've got a ton of K-State Home Field shirts. They just had a new drop a couple of months ago. Now we're getting a new one coming up this weekend. So that is always reason to be excited. I love the vintage Copper Bowl Champions long sleeve black shirt that they put out with the last drop. That is my personal favorite, but they've got all sorts of good stuff, retro logos. It's the vintage stuff that they're going for here, which is in right now. It is what the kids are doing. So we're trying to help you out. Not only get really comfortable, great gear, but also make you popular. Get you up with the times. All right. That's what you need to do. Get your Home Field Apparel. It's homefieldapparel.com. And I mentioned that they have that new drop coming up this weekend. That new Home Field drop of K-State gear will actually be available in store at Rally Houses in the Kansas City area this weekend. So you can get it online. And we're going to give you a promo code for that in just a moment. But if you are in the Kansas City area, you can stop by Rally House this weekend as well. Get your new K-State gear from Home Field Apparel. I know one of the shirts that I saw is the Cat Script basketball logo, which I like a lot. And I'm going to be very interested in procuring one of those shirts. But if you're online, if you've never bought from Home Field Apparel before, 3MA23 with an exclamation mark is the promo code to get 15% off. Again, 3MA23 exclamation mark. Get you 15% off if you have not bought Home Field Apparel before. So get to homefieldapparel.com, get your K-State gear, or if you prefer, one of the other 100-plus schools that they have on the website, and be looking good this fall when you're out of Bill Snyder Family Stadium. All right, Cole gets to rain down on the National College Football Media next.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network. Make sure you download our new app. Find it on the App Store or Google Play. Just search KC Sports Network.
What's good, everybody? It is Ben Heisler from Benny and the Bets here on KCSN. And if you are ready to go the distance and improve your golf game like I am in the process of doing, I want you to head on over to PXG right here in Kansas City and take the PXG Gen 6 Driver Challenge. They are confident in the Gen 6 that they're putting their money where their mouth is. If their Gen 6 driver does not deliver more distance, more carry and roll, tire dispersion compared to your current driver when you go in for a fitting, they got you covered with a $100 MasterCard reward card. That's it. Go in for a driver fitting, see if your driver is up to their driver, and if it is, you get a $100 MasterCard reward card in the process. This is an unbelievable opportunity to upgrade your game with a custom fit PXG fitting. I've had it at the Kansas City store with Alex. It was one of the great experiences I've had in a golf fitting, period. So take the PXG Gen 6 driver all throughout the month of August and get ready to hit those fairways with confidence. So visit your local Kansas City store or head on over to pxg.com for all the terms and conditions. PXG, nobody makes golf clubs the way we do, period.
Okay, Cole, your thoughts on how the national media has handled all of this with the death of the Pac-12 and crying about the loss of 100 years of tradition and ignoring the fact that the Big Eight, which formed most of the Big 12, went back about that far too. So, your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I gag at everything that Greg Sankey says. I find him to be one of the most hypocritical people that you'll ever see. I mean, they started all of this, and he reeks of arrogance. And the media yesterday just talking about his comments on Feinebaum, and like a lot of them were agreeing with him. And it was, I mean, do you guys not see what he's doing here? Like Greg Sankey will go. He's criticized Brett Yormark without saying his name previously about how, Yormark is out there beating his chest, talking publicly about, being open about realignment. And Sankey was saying, and I'm not quoting him directly, but he was essentially saying, I prefer to, do this behind the scenes. Yeah. In other words, you prefer to stab people in the back and be a snake.
Freaking snake about it.
Yeah. Nobody knows what's going on. So you're just a snake in the grass weeding around, and then you come up and attack. And at least Yormark is pretty open about what they were looking to do, and it was about survival. The Big 12 got put in this position. This wasn't what the Big 12 necessarily wanted to do.
And not only that, Cole, who put the Big 12 in this position?
Yeah.
Who put them in this position? Greg freaking Sankey put them in this position.
Yeah. And that's where it just becomes very frustrating, because you have people from schools that started all of this also speaking up. And I know Eli Drinkowitz was not the football coach at Missouri when this all happened. And I can appreciate what Eli Drinkowitz said and his comments about realignment and how it doesn't feel great. But if you remember just a couple of years ago, Drinkowitz was beating his chest with arrogance when, well, why wouldn't you want to come to the SEC when Oklahoma and Texas were rumored? Remember, like he was out there really talking a big game about that. He didn't say like, hey, this sucks for college football that we're adding Oklahoma and Texas. He said, well, everybody should want to be in the SEC, and was really, kind of arrogant about that. And just, if you're a representative of a school like that really started and kicked off all of this over a decade ago, you just need to shut up and not talk about it. All right. Because it becomes across as hypocritical, and it just reeks of arrogance. And so, on a national media front, you should have recognized back in 2010, 2011 that this was a problem, and that what this was going to do to the sport and everything that it kicked off. But you didn't really see a lot of that at the time. And over the last several years, like you guys have all openly talked about, celebrating on the Big 12's grave, so to speak, at what's going to happen. And, a lot of it's the athletic reporters, honestly, that have done it. You've got Stuart Mandel, but you've got also Nicole Auerbach and others who have just, openly went after it. Ari Wasserman, just this last week, I know DY got all fired up about some of his tweets about how bad this is for college football. So, those guys can just shut up. It's great for the Big 12. I don't care what they think. It sucks for college football and college sports overall that this had to happen. If I were to bet, I'll go on the record right now that in the next 10 to 15 years, college athletics is going to reset itself a little bit. And so I think some of the TV money will eventually dry up a little bit. And I would not be surprised if we're looking into a globe into the 15-year future that conferences get more back to their geographic footprint, where some real leaders get in the room and eventually say, what are we doing here? Why do we have these conferences that span coast to coast? The TV money is no longer worth it. It dries up a little bit as people change, go more to streaming, et cetera. and travel costs are astronomical, et cetera. And they get back to the natural rivalries and the geographic footprint that conferences were meant to be. And that's not me criticizing the Big 12. That you got to do what you got to do right now. I think that's something that could very well happen in the future.
I think it'll happen, and I think it's probably part of the plan. I think they're, they use the word consolidation, right? I think they're consolidating the brands and schools that they want in that next world, and once they get all the ones that they want in the next world is when they'll probably have a geographical break of sorts once those are established. But that may be only the case for the sports outside of football. I do think that is it's a necessity right now. I don't know how soon it's going to happen. It's a necessity right now that they do need to break football from the rest of the sports. It's impossible to govern the rest of the sports the way you govern football anymore. It's not tenable because football can afford to travel and do all of these things, especially since they have less trips. The other sports cannot.
I was going to say the same thing, DY. I think there seems to be, listening to the national media right now, there seems to be some real momentum for that, at least a push for that to happen eventually, that separate football, make it its own deal. I've even heard talk of like separating the athletic departments from the university. So it's like the athletic department operates on its own. Florida State seems to be trying to go that way with like private equity, like talking to JP Morgan about raising the $500 million or whatever the hell it's going to be for them to get out of the ACC.
You know what that's going to be? It's going to be probably what'll go in place is the collective. That could be the new football governing body for a school, I think.
Oh, like NIL collective?
Yeah.
I think we are definitely headed towards some change based on how many people are starting to speak out about this now. But how long will that take? Who knows? What will be the collateral damage along the way? Like, when we get there, does Oregon State get back in somehow, or are they just permanently screwed? And obviously in a position like K-State, Iowa State, Oklahoma State, a lot of these schools, you've got to still be a little bit nervous about that in the back of your mind and into where all of this is going long term. You're in a much better position right now with where the Big 12 is at. But yeah, I think if we get more regionality, it's going to be what like Eli Drinkwitz is talking about, which is he was talking about the non-revenue sports and it is tough. Like I get it. So I've traveled with K-State baseball many times throughout my broadcasting career, and it's tough. Like you're flying commercial, you're leaving right after a game on Sunday, and by the time that bus rolls back into Manhattan, it's like 2-3 in the morning, and then those guys have to go to class the next day. So it is really tough, and that's where the travel gets pretty stupid. And the other thing that's going to start happening, DUI, is like TV money will start drying up, and people will look around and be like, all right, well then maybe we should start like actually cutting costs, I guess, if we can't make more money. So how can we cut costs? Well, we can stop sending the softball team 3/4 of the way across the country for 5-hour chartered flights. And then you'll get back to like more regionalized non-revenue sports. I think that's probably the path back there. But, Cole, when you say, hey, some of the leaders are going to start getting together, part of my concern is like, the guy who everybody thinks should be the czar of everything right now is Greg Sankey. Yeah. So like, Dennis Dodd, I'm pretty sure just like built a monument to him in a closet last night, judging by the tweets that were coming out about what Sankey was doing. So I don't know. That makes me obviously very nervous. I don't trust him. And the other thing, DUI, that's going to be an important piece of this coming up is how they're going to do the playoff. Because now with a conference folding, there's a lot of talk about adjusting how it will work with the automatic qualifiers in the playoff, because you have lost one of these quote-unquote Power 5 conferences. And one of the things that has been floated, I know Heather Dinich at ESPN floated the idea of just, hey, take the 12 best teams, just all at large, baby, in the playoff. And that, of course, would be what the Big Ten and the SEC would want. That would not be good news for anybody else. And so it's like those type of decisions that you still worry about down the line.
And that was probably floated by a Big Ten or an SEC representative, of course. But at the end of the day, that's not going to pass muster. And they'll probably not do that just to avoid antitrust litigation, stuff like that, because that's where you do start to exclude yourselves from the majority, and you can get yourself into some legal trouble by doing so. So I think you'll probably see a change, but I think, to keep them, above water, I would imagine it's instead of 6 auto bids, it becomes 5 and then 7 at large. I think that's just a tiny modification there is what I expect, but something I wanted to dig into a little bit, I think, is the next I wouldn't say call it an evolution of college sports, but the next, adventure that we're going to be on is, everything always happens around the end or beginning of new television contracts. That's when you always have a seismic shift, because a lot of these leagues come up around the same time or one after another in consecutive years. And we're going to see that, again, here in 6 to 7 years, we have the Big 12, Big 10, and SEC come up. What's going to be interesting, because I don't think it's going to be the case anymore, since that Oklahoma Supreme Court deal, that became the boom for television money, for all these schools to start making a bunch of television money. And it's increased exponentially ever since, every single year and with every single television contract. I'm not sure that's going to be the case when these conferences go back up for grabs here in 6 or 7 years when they try to sign another television contract. It's either going to be similar, or does it even decrease a little bit? And if it decreases a little bit, you're going to have a lot of pissed off schools all of a sudden that have budgeted for an increase. And with more schools, the decrease would even be more drastic. So that's the next journey that we're all going to go on when it comes to college sports. And you two have both alluded to it, and it's perfectly correct, is the television money is drying up. I think everyone operated in college athletics for some reason as if it was just going to, eternally just keep increasing. Like there was no glass ceiling for it. Well, there is, and we're almost there.
Well, the other part with that too, that's an X factor in it and makes it fascinating as to how all that will play out, is that one thing I will say about this Pac-12 deal, they were probably one cycle ahead of what this is going to look like eventually. But that Pac-12 Apple deal may be what the next one, like it might be Apple and Amazon next time around being the two big players instead of Fox and ESPN. I mean, we'll see. ESPN kind of struggling, and there's talk of like Apple buying out ESPN. So like it could be an Apple Amazon thing versus Fox ESPN. Maybe that's getting a little too out ahead of our skis when we talk about that, but it will likely look a lot different. And another thing too to keep in mind that I will really be paying attention to and how this goes. We know how it's gone for basically every team that has gone to quote unquote greener pastures in one of these realignment moves, which, I'm abstaining like the Big 12 incumbents from that, at least the four corner schools, because they were kind of forced here by the Pac-12 implosion. But the Texas A&M, Colorado, Nebraska, those schools of the world, none of them have been happy with it. It's not really worked out for them, because you go into these leagues where now you're dealing with bigger brands, theoretically. I mean, Nebraska plays a crappy schedule every year and sucks anyway, but you theoretically are playing better brands, and you're going to get beat up a little bit. So, like, for instance, Oklahoma. If Oklahoma 5 years down the line is going 8-4 every year, how happy are they going to be with that scenario? Or like Auburn, a program like that in the SEC with adding Oklahoma and Texas now, making it more tough. If they're going 6-6, 7-5 every year and just going crazy with firing coaches and buyouts, I mean, you're going to have a lot of programs in those sorts of positions. Look at the Big Ten. You're going to have Oregon, Washington, USC, and then Ohio State, Michigan, Wisconsin. How many of these schools and what we perceive to be big brands right now are going to take hits because they're not winning that many games anymore because their leagues are so difficult? So and what challenges will that bring on with all those schools trying to figure stuff out? I just think there probably are more evolutions to come on down the road.
Yeah. Cole, you're talking about maybe your brand diminishing, and I think that's a very real thing to be aware of if you're those schools, because Nebraska isn't the Nebraska that it once was. That brand is diminished. So if you're Oklahoma, do you go to the SEC and see your brand diminish? And then how valuable are you in several years when you're, something happens and you have to make a decision, and maybe you're not as a valuable or as much of a commodity as you once were. And the second thing before I get to Cole is one thing I've always asked, and I guess I've never gotten a real question or a real answer to this, because I don't think people have a good one, is why does it matter? How does being rich, like in the case of Nebraska, Texas A&M, all these schools move, why does getting more money matter if you never win?
Yeah. You hit on exactly what I was going to talk about, DY, because like fans like to beat their chests on social media, like, oh, we're cashing these huge checks. Well, you're not seeing the money. Like, why do you care necessarily? You want to be a fan and watch your team win and enjoy those game day experiences of watching the success on the field or on the court. And you don't get to experience that if you're Nebraska or Missouri right now, really. You're not winning. So, at the level that you would expect. And so that's a big thing to me. The other thing I ask myself is, like, what does the money matter? Like you need a certain amount of money, right? But in the future state of college athletics, like you look at the Big Ten, SEC, if you're making, $60 million a year a school in TV money, what do you do with that money? Because you can only build so many facilities, and we're seeing now, like,
I know what they're going to do with it. They're going to give it to the players. That's what we're going.
Well, that's exactly where it's probably going to have to go, right? Because you don't see teams like when you hear schools talk, like they've already built the facilities. That's not as important to these kids anymore. These athletic departments are supposed to be nonprofit, so they have to put the money back into something, right? Well, you can't be ballooning coaching salaries much higher than they already are, because we're already hearing criticism from players. Like, if players look at a coach and they see him making $10 million a year, $11 million a year, and then they're not making much, they're getting their NIL money, that becomes problematic. And so as I look into the future, like, all that TV money coming into an athletic department per year, like, you have to invest it into something, and it's going to probably have to go to NIL, to your point, DY. They're going to have to figure out to do some sort of, collective sharing model. I'm not thinking of the revenue sharing model.
To defend them, I think that's why a lot of teams are chasing money right now too, is because they have to have enough money to keep their athletic department running the way that it is now, plus maybe double that, because down the line, are you going to have a 50-50 revenue share? You might. It's going to look like professional sports, at least on the football side.
Yeah. That's where I see it probably going, and some legislation passing on that front. Because as we sit today, it's like, K-State, they need the $31.7 million a year to fund the operational stuff. But when you get up to like 60 million, 70 million, I just struggle with that. I also wanted to mention, guys, on the basketball front, Brett Yormark is emphatic behind the scenes and talking to people that if they decouple the basketball and football contracts, or the TV contracts, decouple basketball from it, that each Big 12 school will make substantially more money. And that's based on also adding a few basketball powers in both the West and East Coast. Now, they've already added Arizona, which is a power. But if they target a couple more, like a Gonzaga, UConn, I think there's a couple other options out there as well. He's emphatic that they would make meaningful increases to the TV contract. And, can they open that contract up early? I don't know, for negotiation. But there are talks that could certainly be something that would be financially appealing to each Big 12 school and increase revenue. Now, the ACC collapses. One of the schools you don't hear mentioned in realignment out of all those ACC schools is like a Duke. Duke seems to be getting left out of the fold. So would they be intriguing to a Brett Yormark to add that type of program if they got left out of the fold and the ACC imploded? That could be another option out there. So just some thoughts on that front. But yeah, I don't know what they're going to do with basketball only. I just know that he's talked to TV execs, and there seems to be money that can be had on that front.
Yeah, that's one of the ways to try and squeeze the margins on the Big Ten of the SEC. Like what I was talking about earlier, you had to survive, and that was like step one. Now you put yourself in position to survive and thrive as the third best conference. Now you try to find. Now you can. You've gotten yourself to the point, you pulled yourself up to where you can stand, and now be like, all right, so how do we start to try and close this gap a little bit now that it looks like we're going to survive? The best asset I think you have is to not play the same game as the Big Ten of the SEC and be like, look, our biggest advantage is this behemoth basketball conference we have. So yeah, if we can make an extra, 5 to 10 million, I think is kind of what Yormark would envision there per school. I have no idea how realistic that actually is, but I think that's probably like the idea, and not just Cole sourcing there. I mean, I have had someone tell me that too, that was the idea behind the scenes of what it is that they really would like to do ultimately there. That is a way that you can start to utilize what you have. And I look, Brett Yormark to me has earned the latitude to go figure some of that stuff out. Like if he wants to go add Gonzaga and UConn and basketball only, I don't know, man. He's built up a lot of equity to me with what he has done for this conference. I'll give him that shot. And not only that, his whole track record. I mean, he transformed NASCAR. He moved the Nets from New Jersey to Brooklyn. Like, this has been a guy that gets big stuff done. So yeah, I would keep my eye on that too for sure.
What about this thought? What about Gonzaga, UConn, and basketball only? Then the ACC implodes. You add Duke for all sports, and you add a program like Louisville for all sports, which Louisville, the Yum Center, if people haven't been there, the Yum Center might be one of the nicest basketball. It's a top 5 arena in the country. It's one of the top 5 largest arenas in the country. Basketball is a big deal. at Louisville. Like I think about that, like Duke, Louisville, Gonzaga, UConn, basketball, you become clearly far and away what the SEC is in football and close the gap financially a bit on those other schools by doing that. And, there's other options out there. They could go hard for Villanova, although I've heard Villanova is a little reluctant to leave the Big East and where their footprint is there. You can go after Creighton. I've heard there's value in Creighton, which was a bit surprising to me, just given already a large footprint in the Midwest for the Big 12. But Creighton has some appeal as well, apparently. So just a thought on that. But I think there's some creative ideas now that you sit at 16 and you're in a position of being stable, that you can wait things out and kind of see how things play out and over the landscape over the next couple of years and make a decision on where you want to go.
I would be shocked if we're not sitting here in 10 years in Louisville and Pittsburgh.
Pitt is the other. Yeah.
Are not a part of the Big 12. And maybe 10. I don't think 10's too soon. I know 2036 is kind of like that year for the ACC, but I think that doomsday is probably going to happen sooner.
Florida State's going to challenge it. Whatever the fallout from that will be, I don't know. Florida State will do something.
Yeah, they may pay their way out. But, I mean, there's also some chatter that Florida State doesn't necessarily have an obvious home in the Big Ten or the SEC.
Sankey has publicly said, like, we're not trying to expand and take you. And so, yeah, the Big Ten has been the speculation there. And I guess them getting into Florida, you can see how that might work. But I don't know. There's a lot to play out. I guess
from an institutional standpoint, you would think Miami would probably have more value to the Big Ten than Florida State, though.
Like Miami, Virginia, North Carolina, those are all going to be really popular. And I don't know, Cole, I wonder a little bit about Duke and the Big Ten just because of like the academic reputation and the basketball program. And maybe they want to take some huge basketball program. But I guess the counter to that is, as much as Kansas fans would like to hike their skirt up, they have not reciprocated much interest in Kansas right now with the best basketball program in the country. So,
and I know fan support's a little bit different, but there's a reason Stanford's not attractive necessarily right now too.
Yeah, the academic side makes sense, John, on the Duke front. UNC is a pretty high-profile academic institution too. So if they got North Carolina, then that would kind of hit that, and they're in the same market, obviously. So, do you oversaturate that Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill market where they're in what they call the triangle, which they're all really close to each other? So do you just add one so you capture the TV value there and you don't oversaturate? I think that's probably what they would do. I only mentioned Duke because everything I keep reading, their name doesn't seem to be coming up. And
they could suffer the same fate as Stanford, technically.
Yeah.
That's what it really sounds like. But more than anything, the two most valuable properties in the ACC that the Big Ten wants is actually not what people would assume. People are probably thinking Florida State, Clemson, Miami. No, the Big Ten wants Virginia and North Carolina.
Yeah. Yep. Those are definitely very valued assets right now. I think North Carolina is probably the top of the list. Like SEC and Big Ten would definitely both love to have North Carolina right now. All right. We got way into the weeds on this realignment discussion, but I think it's warranted with everything going on right now. So hope that got you all up to speed. Thank you once again to Holiday Distillery for all of their work supporting the pod. Get your Ben Holiday Bottled and Bond Bourbon. Get your 360 vodka to celebrate the Big 12 expanding. How about that? That was probably the more logical play for me to pump up Holiday here on this pod. And get your home field apparel, homefieldapparel.com, Fremont23, ! 15% off your entire order for first-time purchasers. For Derek Young and Cole Manbeck, appreciate you all listening once again today. Great to be back with you two fellas, and we will talk to you all soon. Thanks for listening to Fremont.